Okay, so good morning, everyone. This is the Policy Committee meeting. Today is December 9th, 2021. And we're happy to have so many members of the board with us. Dr. Johnston and Mr. Oliver and I are going to be presenting a handful of policies for your consideration. We can bring policies that you agree are ready for board vote to the board on January 18th of 2022. We can also continue at another meeting if we need to have further conversation. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen, and Tom, would you let me share the screen so that you can see the policies? That'll make it easier, I think, for the board members. Thank you very much. Okay, so in board docs, you have each of these policies, and the first policy is admission of students. And I'm going to have Dr. Johnston just give you a brief overview of the changes to this policy.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. I appreciate you being here so early in the morning. Policy 201 is near and dear to my heart because as the former Director of Student Services and Special Education, I was responsible to field requests from families to have their child enter our school system early. Many of you know that most of my background, I spent a lot of time working in early childhood, so I feel some very particular emotions about young children beginning formal education before the age of 5. Since I've been here in 2018, we had 3 requests for families of the under the old policy to come to school prior to the 5th birthday on the first day of school. So one of the problems that we're trying to remedy in this policy, and the one I want to bring to you first, is our date in the policy was that children needed to be 5 before the first day of school. So for families, there was no consistency. They would have, because we only publish the new calendar in the spring of each school year, they have no way to know, is their child who has an early September birthday going to be eligible or not eligible to begin school on time, which causes some angst and panic on the parts of the family. So the first recommended change in this policy is to have a clear set date. Currently, we're recommending that date be September 15th. We polled the 7 school districts around us, and there's almost an even split between September 1st and September 15th as a start date. We went with the later date of September 15th, thinking that captures the most amount of children and gives them the most opportunity to start school as a brand new or almost new 5-year-old. But it does preclude, and what we've taken or recommended you take out of the policy is that children who turn 5 after that date, there would be no admission of early 4-year-olds into the school system. Since 2018, we've only had 9 children total over the 4 years who've requested early admission. There's a variety of reasons we would, and I can tell you about that process where we have brought in the child, done a screening, then had our psychologist create a report. We then provided counseling to the family, frankly, advising them against enrolling their child early. Then I'd advise them a second time about advising enrolling their child early. I would do a nice little presentation for that family, either on the phone or in person at their request, talking about my concerns of having young children, young birthdays at the middle and high school level, not getting stuck thinking about kindergarten, but actually thinking about what your 14-year-old is going to do in 9th grade and how that socially could be really challenging, and tried to advise families. I had very little success in advising families who wanted to have their children begin early, although every year we have dropped down how many families have asked. So 2 years ago, we had 2 families request, and last year we had none. So it's our belief that by moving the date, having a standard date, and proposing to all of you that we limit the number of children coming into a school year into kindergarten would be advantageous and allow students to have the greatest chance of success. That said, the other part of the policy is recommending that children cannot begin 1st grade until they were 6 by September 15th, obviously a year later, although we would need to consider whether or not a child who did kindergarten privately in a private school or private organization could be eligible for 1st grade even as a young 5-year-old. Do you have any questions or need clarification on the recommended changes in this policy?
So I mentioned, just for clarification, when you look at these draft policies in board docs, since we're new to board docs this year, what's in green is our administrative recommendations for language additions or changes. What is in black, bold, is recommendations from our solicitor or from PSBA. And then what is in red is old language that we would be deleting. But in essence, what we have in the summary in the agenda there is essentially we're setting a hard date of September 15th. And then we are allowing a child who has completed a kindergarten program in another district or a private program to start prior to the age of 6, if they started early elsewhere and completed a kindergarten program. But if they start with us, they would need to be 6 by September 15th for first grade. And then on the next page, it is 5 by September 15th for kindergarten. Any questions on that policy? So the question I would have for you is, are you comfortable with us bringing this forward on January 18th? So I need you to unmute and say yes, because you guys are, as a committee, you actually have to vote to bring it to the board.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, sounds good. So Mr. Needleman, I think you're going to be the one giving the report
Yeah, that's fine.
on this committee. Okay, so you had a vote to move that one forward on January 18th. We'll take care of that.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson.
Okay, and then the next one, we actually started a conversation about the meetings policy, which is about board meetings. And we actually had 2 readings. And then we received some additional suggestion from our solicitor based on current events in the state of Pennsylvania. So we had a draft approved, and now this is a revised draft. All right. And so there are a few areas where they have made a change. In black, you can see here where they are trying to clean up when there might be close votes for candidates for office among the board. Okay, that is because some other school districts have had contentious elections and nominations for their president and vice president. You can see here under regular meetings, in green, we are recommending some clarity about how and when we would move to virtual meetings. The reason why we've suggested this language is because, as an example, early in the school year when there was the tornado nearby, we found the need to move to a virtual meeting 2 hours prior to the meeting for the safety of the community and the board. And so we tried to adjust this language so that we have the license, if we're looking at safety and unforeseen circumstances, to move to a virtual meeting more than 24 hours ahead of time, or less than 24 hours ahead of time. Okay. And then there are some other items that were recommended by our solicitor around, again, I'm going to say politics of the board shifts. And then the same thing in special meetings. We wanted to clarify that if there are unforeseen weather, et cetera, that you can move to a virtual meeting. And then they clarified for us that there is, prior to official action by the board, an opportunity for public comment, which we have had and would continue to have, but they've just tightened up the language a little bit. And then there is some language around special voting requirements that is recommended by the solicitor. And we actually wanted to clarify in 2C. The language recommended by the solicitor was teacher. We wanted to expand that to professional staff member or administrator, so that any position in the district in which a former board member was going for one of those positions, you would need 2/3 vote of the board.
Dr. Yannicka,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just go back to the change to a virtual meeting for a
Yeah,
second?
sure.
sorry, the mute button. I was looking for it. I just didn't see it. Do we have to state a reason for changing to a virtual meeting? And does that have to be kind of published to the public, for lack of a better term?
It doesn't appear in the language that you have to, but I think as a courtesy to the public, we would.
Okay.
And you may recall, Mr. Needleman, that we also had conversation that if there were disruption in the meeting in the gallery,
Right.
that you could at the meeting make the decision to go virtual.
Right. And state at the meeting that this is why.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And for example, when we moved the meeting on the day of the tornado to virtual, I did announce as a result of severe weather.
Right. Right. No, of course. Okay. Thank you. I just.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah, no problem. So this is some language that is recommended again by the solicitor, just to tighten up how and when board members might be able to run for a position. And then further down, there's just some tightening up again by the solicitor of items that very likely occurred somewhere in the state.
If we have questions, do we just do what? Okay.
Yeah,
just,
no problem.
I didn't want
Sorry,
to interrupt
anytime. Yes,
or see it then. I guess I just had one clarifying question, and forgive my ignorance as I'm starting. But number 4 of like the different types of instances.
Okay.
So like a little bit approving any expenditure over $100. Is the school board really involved at that micro level for contracts that small?
It's a great question. If it's a contract, that is the recommended language. Yes.
And has it been your experience, because I know in the nonprofit world, it has been difficult for staff to move forward if such small contracts need board approval. It can sometimes be difficult to work forward in a timely way for smaller contracts. And I was just curious if you've experienced that, or if that's something that should be considered here.
There's no doubt that greater flexibility would make administration easier. Now,
is it just the fiscal responsibility? I guess it's something I would bring up to fellow board members of whether that number feels a little too low. Anything more than $100 feels extremely low to me, but I don't want to advocate for a lack of financial prudence, but where that line is between agility and financial oversight.
I appreciate that, Sarah. I mean, we will follow whatever policy dictates. Currently, there is a separate policy, and it's escaping me right now, that $18,000 is the threshold for us. And so we do have flexibility there. This appears to be special voting requirements. And it doesn't suggest, because there isn't an asterisk after O, let me double check that. Oh, it does, that you have to actually have an individual vote of the board.
Ah, okay. I understand. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you like, I can take that back to our solicitor and I can ask about whether or not that threshold is their recommendation or whether we can be flexible if the board would like a higher threshold.
I mean, if nobody else is seeing any concerns on the board, I'm willing to let it go. It was just something that was particularly striking for me reading this for the first time.
Yes.
But I'm not hearing anyone else saying anything, so continue.
When you approve on a regular basis our expenditures, you approve a long list of items. Okay. Anything else in this? There's abstention from voting under the Ethics Act. Mr. Needleman, this is probably more familiar to you. So they've just, again, this is all new language from the solicitor. And that's really to protect the board.
And it's in the interest of disclosure, right, and public transparency, and I think that makes sense. I mean, it's always better to have conflict of interest rules, right?
Yes, I think so. It helps you to clarify expectations. If you have a question, the answer's there. I mean, the thing that's interesting about this policy is it is very specific. And typically with policy, the suggestion is to have flexibility embedded within the policy. But I think these are areas where the goal here is to keep board members in good stead. Okay. All right, so I'll move that one forward for another reading in January.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. All right, so I'm going to go back into the agenda for civility. So Dr. Etlin had requested that we take a look at a civility policy. And this is the policy that's recommended by PSBA. And it's a fairly straightforward and brief policy. We did make some recommendations for language shifts, and I'll just review those quickly. So under number 2, we felt that the word good was an imprecise word with regard to citizenship. We certainly agree that we should be teaching citizenship in our curriculum, but we want to be careful about what one segment of the community or another might deem as good. We could add responsible citizenship, something else that's a little bit more descriptive, but we thought maybe just keeping the word citizenship was appropriate. And then again, procedures for conflict resolution rather than programs for peer mediation, because programs for peer mediation are very specific. And we do have procedures for conflict resolution. Currently, we use restorative practices and responsive classroom, but we didn't want to tie up if something different came along in the future that we wanted. We thought this was gave us more flexibility. And then we really don't use cable television anymore. So we thought that was a dated term and that we should drop that from the list. Dr. Etlin, I'm curious to hear if this meets what you were hoping for in a civility policy, or if there was additional language you were hoping to see.
No, it does. It really does. And I appreciate revisiting this and putting a new curve on it where needed. So thank you.
Absolutely. And we have taken a look at how this would dovetail with our complaint policy, and it does appear to blend nicely. Okay. All right, terrific. So would you like me to bring this on January 18th for a first reading?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Question, are you going to add responsive citizenship, or are you going to just leave it citizenship?
Well, I'll defer to the board. Would you like it to say responsible citizenship?
I would have to go with responsible rather than citizenship, because I think we need to put an adjective and more definitive to make it more descriptive. So
Okay.
my vote would be to make, to add another ad to make it descriptive.
I
Okay.
agree.
So
Yeah, I
I am going to, this is the great thing about board docs. I'm going to go into our civility policy. And I will edit it immediately. And just like that, it'll be. Okay. This new board docs is very user-friendly. Okay. All right, so that brings us to educational equity. Now, I wanted to make sure that you noted in the draft section of board docs that there were 2 resource documents that were attached, and I'm just going to hold them up for you. So there is an educational equity policy manual, because this is a new policy brought out by PSBA, and then there's a shorter document on communication support with regard to the educational equity policy. And this has been a component of our discussion as part of the equity team work, and was intended to be a component of our equity action plan, that we would add an educational equity policy that then would hold the district accountable, and specifically the administrative team accountable for regular reporting and data collection around educational equity. So I know it's a long policy, and I don't want to presume that you've had the chance to read it all in advance, but I can just hit a few highlights. And then obviously, if you want to have a second meeting to really dig into, if you need more time to dig into it, I understand, because this is a major adoption, I think. So this policy 832, PSBA placed in the 800s under operations. I think this is an interesting note, because they believe that educational equity is a structural component of a school district, which I think is really important, that equity pervades all areas of school district life, from resource allocation, the accessibility of your buildings, to curricula, hiring of staff. It really does hit all areas of school district life. And so that's why it's policy 832 and falls under the operations of a district. The definitions, if you look into those attachment documents under board policies resources, and you see the draft of this policy, you'll see that these definitions are provided by PSBA. But you can see here that they did provide an option that you can have local approaches and you can modify the definitions if you like. So if any of the definitions you would like to make modifications, we can certainly do that. You can provide me in an email a recommended changes of language or addition of language for any of these definitions. And, we'll be happy to bring that again to the full board. I do think this is such an involved policy. It warrants, more than a one-day discussion, but did want to begin the conversation. So just sort of with the overview of the policy. So all the definitions here again are provided by PSBA, and they have been reviewed by our solicitor. I do know that several neighboring districts who've adopted educational equity policies have largely adopted these in whole. So for example, North Penn essentially took these definitions and the language in whole. But there are terms, if you look at the attachment documents, where you could add language that may be important to our district, such as the word intersectionality does not appear in this document, but is language that is sometimes used by districts and has been used by our district. The phrase social justice is not specifically a definition, but if you'd like that to be defined here, then we can do that as a team. The second section, a delegation of responsibility, essentially gives me and our administrative team our marching orders from the board as to what you want to see from us on an ongoing basis. So the areas where we've provided suggestions for your consideration are how often the audit would occur. So we're finishing up an audit. Our suggestion here, they give you the options of periodically, annually, biannually. We're suggesting that we do it every 3 years in conjunction with the comprehensive planning process. Because again, if it is an integral component, we want to make sure that because every 3 years the state requires comprehensive planning, that we embed educational equity as an essential and integral component of that process. So that's one, that language in green is again our administrative recommendation. And then we also feel that 3 years allows for layered options for growth, which we're hoping you'll see in the next month when we bring you the first action plan. And then again, we would be presenting that action plan every 3 years, rather than periodically, annually, or biannually. We want to be specific that it's every 3 years. And then what it should do, the language in black is the recommended language from PSBA. We've actually, what we think is further clarified what we would be including in that action plan in green. And then as far as the update is concerned, I don't have it marked here, and I'll mark it on the other document within board docs, but annually is what our thought was, that there would be a public meeting annually, where we would provide an update on where we are in the action plan and, items that have been completed, items that are still in progress, etc. And then the next section includes what can be included in that update. And we want to leave all of these open because they use the word may. So the educational equity update may include data on, and then all of these. So depending on what's in the action plan, many, most, or all of these elements may be included. And that gives the board flexibility to say, I want to see this in this year's update, or that is less of a priority for us right now. I'd like you to concentrate on these other items. So leaving it open allows maximum flexibility for what the board would like to say. And then the next section, guidelines, essentially we left it exactly as PSBA recommended, which is, our maintaining multiple pathways for students to be able to reach high expectations, access to resources, our welcoming and inclusive environment, inclusion, that we are using data, that we do our work through an equity lens. It defines cultural proficiency and what our curriculum will do to support cultural proficiency, including professional development, workforce diversity, recruitment, retention, and hiring, which we've been talking about. And then I already mentioned professional development. So essentially, and then here are the attachments at the bottom. So if you go into board docs, into the drafts of policies, you'll actually be able to link to that attachment if you want to take a deeper dive into those resources, which provide additional information that you could include in a policy. So this is really a first look at educational equity and sort of some of the key pieces, which is how often do you want an audit and how often do you want a public accounting for where we are as a district. And so,
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, happy to take your feedback. We are going to show this policy also to our equity team next week and ask them to take a look at it over the winter break and give us feedback as well. We're going to give them the 2 attachments and the core doc.
Can I can then just ask 2 quick questions, and forgive me if this is in the attachments, I just haven't had a chance to read it, and also given that the equity committee is going to come back with feedback, this is probably immature, but probably premature, but and maybe immature. Forgive me. Is the difference between the update and the audit? Am I thinking about that correctly? If it's sort of like the difference between a progress report and a report card?
Not quite. Okay.
Okay.
Progress report, yes. The update would be like a progress report. Here's where we are in our goals, in achieving our goals. So let's say, for example, one of our goals were over the next 3 years, we will achieve proportional representation among our staff relative to our student body. All right. If we are 9% African American, we would like to make sure that we are at least 9% African American among the staff. And let's say in year 1, I said to you, we're currently at 7.7. And then in year 2, I said, we're currently at 8.6. You would be able to see progress towards that ultimate goal. The audit itself is having an outside group come in to do what we just did over the last month, which is let's dig into multiple data areas. Let's do qualitative input with the community. And that doesn't preclude us from doing, for example, focus groups with members of the community more frequently. But it's hiring an outside group, as we just did with Penn, to come in and actually do a full audit.
Thank you. You answered my second question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say there are districts that in their educational equity policy are saying periodically and not tying it, because there is sort of this philosophical idea that you should maintain flexibility in your board policies. But we feel like 3 years is an acceptable benchmarking period where you're going to say, okay, at this point, we really should get more outside feedback. But we do want to, one of the things that's part of this policy is that we would have persons who are assigned to do ongoing disaggregated data pulls and an analysis and then presentation. And I will be frank, we don't currently have that. So while Linkit can disaggregate the data and some standardized test data comes to us disaggregated, and for example, the Penn Survey of Belonging comes to us disaggregated, we absolutely need, and we currently have the position posted for Director of Support Services, including DEI work, because we feel that we need somebody whose specific assignment is pulling this data, analyzing it, and presenting it to the administrative team, and then helping us to create ongoing action plans in order to keep moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I had just a clarification question again, just trying to catch up on the who will be determining in that example you gave, right? With our who will be determining what that actual goal number is. Is that something that the school board will be doing, or that you will be setting, or some other?
Right. So we have an equity team that goes district-wide. The equity team would be working on those goals. For example, we're in the process of drafting the action plan that we'll present to the board in January. So from my perspective, it's a three-pronged approval. So our equity team works to develop the draft proposal of the action plan. Then we have a scheduled public meeting on January 12th, where we will want public feedback from parents and community members. And then we'll bring to the board, here's the action plan that our equity team and our community, based on our equity team and our community feedback, suggests we should put forward for the next 3 years. And then the board can say, sounds good, or I'd like you to tweak this, or I'd like you to add that. And that's what we would move forward with. So I really feel like it's a collaborative effort to create that action plan. One of the things, Sarah, as a new board member, I'll reiterate for you is that I serve at the direction of the board. So, and you don't have to wait 3 years. If the board as a group, not individual board members, but if the board as a group wants to direct me to do anything that's legally allowable, you can tell me anytime. So we can, you can adjust an action plan, you can adjust goals. I present goals to the board every June for the following school year in draft. And then we have a conversation over the summer, and the board decides whether you're happy with the goals that I've established or you want adjustments. And then those goals come back to the administrative team. And this would be, one goal would be, continued work on the action plan.
I think 3 years is an excellent time for outside audit to come in, because it does give you 3 years to show that improvement. Having feedback to the parents and so forth yearly is a good goal, but I just want to also make sure that we're getting those benchmarks looked at as we move throughout that year. That's so important. And if we're doing that through the equity committee, that's great, but really keeping focus on those benchmarks as you move throughout the year. So a year does not go by without really direct focus on how we're progressing.
Absolutely, I appreciate that, Ms. Green. So our intention would be, for example, embedded within the action plan will be, for example, quarterly review of benchmark data at each level. So it'd be embedded within, but the public report would be an annual report, like the state of the district with regard to equity. Okay. All right, so I'll bring this back to our next meeting, but if in the interim there's any language that you want us to adjust, please just, you can email me and say, here's some language I'd like you to bring to the next meeting. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to our agenda. The next 3 policies are all intended to tighten up language around social media, because quite frankly, our language is outdated. Things have moved quite quickly. So the first one is a brand new policy. We do not currently have a district social media policy. And what this policy will allow is some guardrails for us around anything that would be a district social media account. So this is focused primarily on whatever is on our website that represents the district. So as an example, currently, if you go to the main page of the website, you see the @SDST schools. That's actually a Twitter account I created and that I manage, but it is not owned, it's not managed by the district. And so if I were to leave the district, that account would go away. What this allows us to do is create social media accounts at the board's direction. So if the board decided you wanted a Facebook account for the district, we would create one. If you wanted an Instagram, or I don't know, whatever comes up 3 years from now, 5 years from now, if there was some platform that you wanted us to be using, then it would allow for a district managed account where there could be multiple people involved. And so you can see here under the purpose, it identifies the differences between personally owned social media and those maintained by the district. We do not currently have that in place. Each principal has their own social media account that they use as the principal, but this would sort of tighten up the lines. The other thing that I thought was very important to bring to you is this choice between a public and a non-public forum. In a public forum, any district-owned social media account includes comments from the public that then have to be managed 24/7. So that if anything, any hate speech, any threats, the kinds of things, unfortunately, that some districts have had to deal with public social media accounts, you have to have somebody who is a full-time manager of that account. Our recommendation, strong recommendation, is that if we have any district accounts, they are non-public forums where the comment feature is turned off. It's unfortunate in this day and age, but that's the thought behind it. Because they do have other forums in which to raise their questions and concerns, in fact, directly to the board. So the authority here would make sure that we included our official school district name, the logo, the seal, the mascot of the district. It could be all or any of those, if you like, or that of the individual school. And then again, there are a few times here where you have to choose non-public or public. And we are, again, strongly recommending that we take out everything that's public forum, so that any account that exists, people can't comment right at that forum. And then as far as responsibility is concerned, our recommendation is that it's the superintendent or designee, which gives maximum flexibility. So if in the future we hired a communications director, which we do not have, I could designate that person. Or if we needed it to be Luann McKenna, I could designate her. So really anybody could be designated. That gives you maximum flexibility. Okay. And then again, towards the end here, it's the public non-public. Anything in red is that public non-public forum piece. And then there's some information about making sure that the only photos that go up on a public site are those that include, if they're the faces of children, that they are children whose parents have submitted approval to be on public sites, making sure it's accessible. And then you could link to other accounts if you wanted to. And then we did say here under personal social media accounts that we wanted to add outside of a person's included in a staff member's family. We want to make sure that we have a number of parents in the district that they can still connect to their own children's accounts. And that's it. That's the whole policy. So PSBA does recommend that we adopt a social media policy, even if we only right now have a Twitter account. It just allows for some flexibility in the future. So any questions about this policy?
I would just say, I think this is a great idea. And I think what it's saying is like your purpose is to share information, not to create a platform where people can, give their thoughts and opinions. So I think all the wording in this I like a lot, but I think it's important to have it out there because this is the way we're moving. You know what I mean?
Thanks, Ms. Hubel. Yeah, who knows what's coming in the next few years, right? Who knows what platform will be coming, but it does allow for at least a framework. And I will remind everybody, you can always bring a policy for revision. And PSBA on a quarterly basis provides us policy updates. So if anything changes in the landscape, as the executive session we had the other day around public comment, they will right away get to us and they'll recommend change this policy as soon as possible. And here's the language we recommend. So these are, they're fixed until you change them. You always have flexibility to vote to make changes to language. Okay.
I had 2 comments. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot.
That's okay, that's what you're supposed to be doing, that's great.
One is just thinking about the definition of social media and just like to your point about it changing rapidly, right? Where there's as new platforms come out.
Yes.
One thing that I'm curious how it fits in here that I've experienced as a parent is that, and this was obviously much more prolific during the shutdown, like the in-between times where things were a little bigger, but there are a number of teachers that use YouTube to make videos that are instructional or that are recording a class play that they then send to parents. And I'm curious how that falls under this, because that has been a little bit of a dangerous space where sometimes the teachers don't know how, like they might post a video of a class presentation and not make it private, so it's actually public on YouTube. And then also just YouTube as a forum, like having our children go on YouTube, and if they're younger, that then you get all the suggested videos afterwards, right? Because they can't watch it on YouTube Kids. And I'm just curious how YouTube fits into this and that practice of teachers using it for recording.
It's a great question, and not one we had considered, quite honestly. Let me take that back to our solicitor.
Because I did have a recommendation if there are other platforms like Loom or other things that you can record, but then it doesn't give you those like network connections to other things on YouTube, that I would just encourage the district to think about in this proposal. And then the other thing with non-public forums is just that on some platforms currently, and this may change, but on Twitter, there is no way to, you can make it that the replies don't show up, but it is unlike Instagram and Facebook, you can't completely turn off comments. And so I think that, maybe this is too much ahead, but just like, what if there are platforms where you can't disable comments? Is that still a platform that it's appropriate for the district to then be posting on with this policy?
I think it's another good question. We can certainly follow up with the solicitor. My suggestion would be, if our policy says they must be non-public forums, then that would call into question whether or not that particular social media site is applicable to our district. But Dr. Johnston, let's make a note there, even in the short term without the policy, of the Loom versus YouTube. I do think that's a good point for our teachers, even before the policy is approved. There are some districts, it's interesting how often districts are using YouTube. A number of districts actually stream their board meetings over YouTube. And to me, it just seems too broad a platform. All right, so would you like this policy? We'll get some answers and bring it to the next meeting before we would bring it to the board for a vote, okay?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take care of that.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. I'm sorry, I've got to run.
No, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay.
I'm happy to present Dr. Yannicone if you wouldn't mind just emailing me what the couple things I missed. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all. Okay. So maintaining adult professional and adult student professional boundaries is a policy that we do have. And the last revision was 2016. And you'll see in here, there's a few recommendations from PSBA and or our solicitor for a little bit of language adjustment. And really for us, the key here is that we wanted to add in, and I'll show you here, we wanted to make sure that family members could still have electronic communication with their own children, because we have so many staff members, including Dr. Johnston, who has children in the district that she would like to continue to be able to follow their social media accounts. But we also needed to add some Title IX language. And so you see that here. The investigation comments are all around Title IX language. And so that's really it. This, there's not a ton of change to this policy, but it reiterates what the expectations are for boundaries and for reporting responsibilities under Title IX. So we didn't actually have any personal changes other than what was already provided by PSBA. Are there any questions about this policy? Are you comfortable with us bringing this policy forward?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So we'll bring that one forward. And then the last policy, acceptable use. Again, this is a 10-year-old policy. So there are a lot of language changes for acceptable use. And essentially, this policy focuses on what is and is not permitted by students and staff when using district-owned devices. So their Chromebooks, for example. Cell phones, when you are a district employee who is assigned a cell phone, like myself. So there is a lot of language change here because, again, this is an older policy as it exists currently for the district. So they had to add language that wasn't around in 2011, wasn't in the mindset. A lot of information here about different devices. Okay, and again, everything that you see in bold is the recommendation of PSBA and or our solicitor. And it's responding to, unfortunately, things that have been occurring in schools for the last decade.
Okay, me again. One of the things
okay.
I just wanted to flag, just looking at this in the line about advertising, remind me that I forgot to say on the other policy, this kind of intersects with both, but the idea of tagging corporate entity, like corporate sponsorships on district social media, about whether, I just would ask the question to the rest of the board, but that is a gray line between being a form of advertisement, and so it would be in conflict with this policy, I think, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Sorry, can you point me out to where in the language you're seeing that conflict?
Possibly, and I may be misunderstanding it, but number 4, where it says product advertisement, under prohibitions in the acceptable use, and then under the social media.
I'm sorry, I might not
Page
be.
5, Dr. Yannicone.
Oh, thank you. Page 5, number 4.
Mm-hmm. And
Prohibitions
then,
is at the bottom of the one page, and then scroll down to the next page,
Okay.
right there.
Ah, okay.
and that in the social media accounts, in the social media one, the district social media, under connecting with other social media accounts, there was the option that when a board approved corporate sponsorship includes connecting with the district, that they can be tagged on social media.
Okay.
And again, for context, you all, I worked for you as a social media specialist for
Yeah, this is helpful. Thank you.
for an organization, but just wanted to flag for folks to consider, to think about that may be seen as a form of product advertising if the district tags a corporate entity on social media, and it could conflict.
So for
with this.
example, if we were to retweet something that was posted by the Special Olympics of Pennsylvania, because officially they're a corporate entity, we might be in conflict.
I mean, that one
with
seems
policy.
pretty innocuous, right? But I could see it becoming more of a conversation if Coca-Cola had a funding initiative for schools, and then you tag Coca-Cola on Facebook because we got some kind of award. I mean, they don't, and I wish more corporate people were giving money to schools, but.
Well, we actually did recently receive corporate money through our food services giant. Actually provided us a check. And so I don't know whether we tagged Giant, but it's worth us following up with the solicitor to ask that question.
And I think probably what the solicitor may ask is, a lot of times corporate entities have a nonprofit arm that does the giving to resolve this issue, but I just wanted to flag that those things would be at ends.
Absolutely. Well, okay, I'll follow up on that. And then was there another area where language was highlighted? Yeah. Okay.
That's it. And again, I'm not trying to be a.
Sorry, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. You each bring different expertise, and we appreciate that. And I will freely admit this is not my area of greatest strength. Okay. So we're very happy for the feedback. Mr. Oliver has also reviewed these just from a feasibility as the Director of Technology. Any other questions on this policy? So we'll follow up with the solicitor, get an answer. And if the answer is satisfactory, then we can bring it to the board on the 18th. If you'd like, we can, at in the next meeting, we can follow up and just clarify that language, if that's necessary.
I'm okay with it moving forward. I just wanted to flag.
Okay, all right. We'll get an answer, and if we need to make a revision, you'll see it in board docs, and we'll let you know. Okay. All right, so it's 8:55. I feel pretty good for our first meeting. We were able to get through our entire agenda. I will ask you, it sounds like we'll try for the next meeting to be 4 o'clock. And we do have 1 or 2 other policies that we might like to get on the agenda. So I'm thinking about potentially that second week in January, so the week prior to the board meeting week, potentially having a 4 p.m. meeting. Is that something that would work for the committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
and at that meeting, we can also bring refined educational equity policy language. And we'll also have the feedback at that point of the equity team on the policy. Okay. All right, terrific. Are there any other questions or any other policies that the committee members would like us to be taking a look at?
Dr. Yannicone, going back to the equity policy, would it be possible before our next meeting to have the feedback and suggestions or recommendations from the equity team so that we could incorporate and at least have a side-by-side view of their thoughts and recommendations and look at the policy?
Absolutely. Be
Okay.
happy to do that. Yes.
Great.
Realistically, I'm going to give them the policy draft. I wanted to wait till after our meeting. I'm going to give them the policy draft and the resources that are provided by PSBA as you have in board docs. And then I'm going to ask them to come back after the winter break and provide their recommendations. So I would probably get them to you approximately a week in advance of our next meeting. Does that sound feasible?
That sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, terrific. Okay, well, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. And I'll make sure, Dr. Johnson and I will make sure that Mr. Needleman has the summary notes. And just so you know, typically what happens is there's minutes from this meeting. They'll go to all of you. And then Mr. Needleman, as the chairperson, is responsible to present to the board at the public meeting. And then if there are any questions about the minutes in advance of that public meeting, any member of the committee, you can feel free to say, I think we forgot to mention that, or I'd like you to adjust this in the minutes prior to them being published, and then presented at the public meeting. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody, for your feedback and input and for being here this morning.
Good day,
You're
everyone.
welcome. Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Bye.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Have a great
Have a good
day.
one. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thanks, everyone.